Hi, and welcome to Frances Cooks. Today I'm going to be making a dish using a recipe from my classes up at Silverado Cooking School in Napa. Ricardo, the farmer there, grows these amazing heads of cabbage, and that's what we're going to be using today. So, if you would like to cook along with me, gather your ingredients together. Here's a list. And if you want the full recipe, you can go to my website at francescooks.com and find the full recipe there. So, gather all your ingredients together and let's get ready to start cooking. Okay, once you gather all your ingredients together for this dish, you're ready to start. And we are preheating our oven to about 400. I have my cast iron pan ready to go, nice well-seasoned cast iron pan, and I have my ingredients that I showed you already. So first thing we're going to do is take the 2 slices of bacon and just chop them up into chunks. The French call these lardons, and we're going to heat up my pan with the bacon in and render out all the fat, which means draw out all the fat. So you don't need to put any oil or anything in the pan at this point. So cold pan, add in the bacon over kind of a medium-high heat. And I have a great little tool, which I'm not using, which I showed you what you should use, is this guy here. You put that into the pan, spread it out, and we're going to brown the bacon just until it's kind of golden brown and that the fat is rendered out. So we don't want hard, dry bacon. We want it to be nice and soft. And just because I used some meat on this, I'm going to just wipe my board, flip it over, and then I can rinse out my cloth. Bacon is rendering, we're going to get the other ingredients ready. So I'm using half an onion. I've already cut it in half, and just removing the outer skin, and just pull that back. And we're going to just trim off the very end of the onion so that the root end is still there. And we will just cut it in kind of wedges through that, maybe into about 4 pieces, not too big. Wedges of onion, and if it falls apart, don't worry, that happens. And we're also going to add an apple, and the apple that I'm adding in is a pink lady apple, and it's one of the apples I really like working with because it is a nice hard apple. It's tart, but it's also sweet. And just cut the apple in half, cut it into quarters, and then with your knife just cut with a paring knife into the center, halfway down, and then the same thing on the other side, and then the core just pops out, so you can see that. So you could use an apple core or 2, or a melon bowler. Sometimes when it's in half like that, using a melon bowler works as well. So we're cutting them into quarters, removing the core. I can hear my bacon sizzling behind me, so I'm going to stop and just take a look at that. And I'm using a pair of tongs because that's what we're going to be using later on. The pan is getting nice and hot, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And you can see, if I show it to you, that the fat is just starting to render out. You'll see there's plenty of bacon that's just starting to take on some color. And so what I'm going to do is start putting the onion wedges in and getting them to brown in the bacon fat. And just kind of moving them around a little bit, just to make sure they get coated with some of the bacon fat. And you can flip them over. We'll be doing the same thing with the cabbage, so that both sides are coated. And then the cabbage that we're using, I'm going to put these guys off to the side for the moment. The cabbage that we're using, I've already cut it in half, but it's what they call a cone cabbage. Usually they're much more pointy than this, but this one I got at the farmer's market on Saturday. And what we're going to do is find where the stem is, and you can see where that stem is. And again, a bit like the onion, I'm going to cut it into wedges. So 1, 2, maybe 4 wedges like that, so that each piece has some of the stem attached to it, and that way it'll stay together in the pan. And I'm going to do the same thing. If you want to look, I'm going to just, you can see the bacon is getting nice bit of color going on it, and I'm going to put in the cabbage, And again, make sure that it's nicely coated with bacon fat. Yum. And we'll probably just about fit 4 pieces in. And you can move everything around, kind of push the bacon and the onions out of the way and kind of push them on top. Just make sure that both sides of the cabbage has got well coated with bacon fat. And if your bacon is very lean, you might want to drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil, just a little bit, but I think mine is pretty good. And then again, you can just take the apples and stick them in around with the cabbage. And then it goes into a super hot oven and you just roast it until everything, halfway through, maybe after about 10 minutes, depending on, yeah, about 10 minutes, we will check it and see what it looks like. So that goes in on the top shelf of a very hot oven. And in the meantime, I'll just get some parsley ready. And I love adding parsley at the end of a dish. It gives it a really bright color, but it also adds a great flavor, fresh flavor, and it's full of iron and vitamins and all sorts of good stuff. So we're just going to chop that roughly, not too fine. Okay, so our cabbage has been cooking for about 10 minutes. So now I'm going to take a look at it and be careful because the cast iron pan will be very hot. And so you can take a look. It's just starting to crisp on the edges, which is great. And it's getting nice and brown. So I'm going to just flip the cabbage over and get the other side to get brown. The apples and the bacon and the onions can stay underneath, but this is what I'm looking for, is nice crispy edges on the cabbage and that it will be tender. And the apples are starting to cook as well. The bacon is looking good, and we're almost there. So we put it back in and making sure that the cabbage is up top so that these leaves get really nice and crisp. Okay, so another 10 minutes finally, and we're going to get ready for when the cabbage is completely ready. I have some cider vinegar and I have a little bit of maple syrup, and I'm going to drizzle those on the top of the cooked cabbage for another little bit, because the cabbage actually still, yeah, it's got a nice crunch to it, but it's looking good. And then the very last thing that you do is you take a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of cider vinegar, and you drizzle those over the top, and the maple syrup. And then lastly, I'll put a sprinkling. There is salt in the bacon, so don't put too much on. A little bit of salt and black pepper. And then finally finish with the chopped parsley. Roasted coon cabbage with parsley, bacon, and a little maple syrup. Enjoy.